If you somehow don't know by now, the WGA and SAG are currently on strike. Now, what do spec scripts have to do with why they're on strike? Hi, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Megan. I am an aspiring TV writer and I am sharing my journey into the entertainment industry here on YouTube. Before I get too far into today's video, I want you to answer that question for me in the comment section. Do you know what spec scripts have to do with the strike? And no skipping to the end, that's cheating. Just tell me what you think at this point. I posted a poll recently asking my community about spec scripts and if they'd ever written one. And a good amount of people didn't even know what a spec script was. So before I get too much further into how spec scripts relate to the strike, let's just first go over what spec scripts are really quick. Now, there are two different ways that spec scripts are used, but overall, a spec script is a script written on speculation. You're not being paid for it, you're not being hired to write it. It's a script that a writer writes on their own and then brings out to the market, usually. Technically, that would mean any script you have not been hired to write. But how it's used is more in features. That will be an original idea for a script that somebody writes the whole thing and then again brings out to market. But when we're talking about TV spec scripts, more so what people are referring to is a script written for an existing TV show. So let's say you're watching a TV show, you're really enjoying it, and you think to yourself, oh, this would be a really interesting episode if this was on the show. If you then wrote that episode, that would be a spec script. There are also, when it comes to TV spec scripts, some guidelines that people tend to suggest. For example, the show should be actively on, it shouldn't be from years ago, and you don't want it to go against the canon of the show. Now, for the purposes of this video, I'm going to focus primarily on TV spec scripts, but it's important to know the differences and understand what people mean when they refer to each. So a lot of times when we're talking about TV spec scripts, they're used as a writing sample. It's a way for a writer to show that they have the ability to write in another writer's voice. So when you're writing TV, a lot of the times you start out writing other people's stories. You are in a writer's room writing towards a showrunner's vision. And if you can't write in their voice and make the show feel like a cohesive story written by the same voice, that's not very helpful. And aside from just having that as a writing sample, it's really great practice to make sure you have those skills. Writing a spec script helps you see what your issues are when it comes to writing in a different voice. It can be hard enough to figure out your own voice as a writer, but then having to write in a whole different voice can be really, really challenging. So not only are they a writing sample, but they also really act as a practice tool to make sure that you're ready to be working in that position. Now, there are people both in and out of the industry who have started to question how useful spec scripts are today. While the things I said are true, they can be used as a writing sample, they're really great practice, and it's really not uncommon to have a spec script be a requirement to apply for a fellowship, but they're not used as much as a writing sample when you are applying to different jobs as a TV writer. There are different reasons for that, but the point is the question then becomes, is it worth doing them anymore? And I think that there's no one right answer, right? Of course not. But from the different conversations that I have seen and looked at online, I think where I land is that you should know how to write them. And it's good to have a few active ones in your portfolio. So if 10 years ago you wrote a Grey's Anatomy spec, that's not something I would consider having in your portfolio when we're talking about active spec scripts, because yes, that show is still on, but the spec script you wrote for it 10 years ago, it isn't gonna mean too much now. Or if you wrote one for Friends, again, that's not active what's in the market. So you wanna have a couple that you are able to use, but you don't need your entire portfolio to be spec scripts either. You should know how to write them, you should be able to have ones to pull from, but I think it's much more beneficial, especially to early writers, to have pilots that they write rather than primarily spec scripts. And I think what this all comes down to is that the industry is changing, and what was industry standard and best practices 10, 15, however many years ago is not today. And that is why the strike is happening right now, because there is a lot about the industry that's changing, and that's not a bad thing. Industries change and grow and evolve, but the contracts are not being adjusted to account for that change. And as a result, workers in this industry are not being treated with fairness and respect. Let me know if you were able to make that connection way in the beginning, because I know it's a little topsy-turvy, but I think it really speaks to so much of the discontent with workers in this industry and why writers and actors are not willing to back down on their negotiations and what is important to them. Now, if you want to know a little bit more about spec scripts and the details there, you can go ahead and watch this video next. I go through everything you need to know about spec scripts and the whole world that exists there and the little specificities.